Cool. All right, so we're gonna get started over here. So I want this to be something kind of bi-directional, since I mean we have the opportunity to do that in this kind of closed environment. And so if you have any doubt or something is not clear, just like directly just raise your hand and we'll go over it. So first of all, how many of you are technical, like developers or somewhat technical? Okay, so I will start with more like the actual kind of user-friendly things, and then just kind of leave the developer stuff for maybe talking about it later with a couple of beers. So first of all, how many of you know what a DAO is? Okay, it's kind of a bad name, to be honest, because a DAO means decentralized autonomous organization. And so, all right, the organization part, we kind of get it. It's an organization, which means it's something that we are used to in the traditional world, like a company, a non-profit, like a legal entity to, for example, get together with some friends or with some partners and do something like this space here. And autonomous is kind of a little bit harder to understand because organizations by default are not autonomous. Like they need people to exist. That's the core thing about organizations. You can get into the AI sort of like rabbit hole and say that AI will run organizations, but we are not there yet. And the other one is decentralized. And so decentralized is also a little bit misleading because what they are trying to say here is that this organization lives in a blockchain, so it's impossible to censor. It lives on this decentralized ledger, but it doesn't mean that like you can have a DAO, for example, that is a centralized company. Like there are people using Aragon to like create, for example, LLC structures, like traditional company structures in the US. So like with a couple of people, they set up a company and they have like a beautiful Aragon interface, but they are not like purely decentralized entities. And so when I try to describe Aragon, I'm trying with a new different things, and one of them is open source meets human organization. So like instead of thinking about it, not even thinking about blockchain, like blockchain is just like one tool that we have for reaching this end goal, but the idea is you basically make organizations open source and with everything that implies. And so open source implies that it's interoperable, which means that you can get together multiple modules and pieces and build your own organization. Open source means that it's also like transparent and forkable, meaning that the code base is there, and if you don't like it, you can fork it. Like there is no lock-in. There is no lock-in. For example, in traditional organizations, you have the lock-in. You have, for example, you create an entity in Switzerland or in Spain or in the US, and you are locked there. Here, you don't have that because also open source is global. Open source is code. You can run code anywhere. And so that's the cool thing about DAOs and about Aragon is that you create your organization and it's internet native. There is no kind of borders. And when I was like 15, I tried to create my first company in Spain, and there were a couple of things that were interesting. One of them is the fact that because of regulations, you cannot create a company if you are under 18. And I was like, why? And then the second one is even if you can create it, you cannot interact with other organizations in like India, Iran, Argentina seamlessly. And if you are born with the internet, it kind of blows your mind because you're like, all right, if I can send like one package of data over the internet to India, why cannot I not only send money but like send shares or just fundraise from people all around the world, for example. So that's why I think open source meets human organization makes sense. In terms of numbers, Aragon has been used to create more than 500 decentralized organizations, which is pretty cool because like 4 or even 3 years ago, DAOs were like a myth. They were like a mythological sort of entity. And then there was the DAO, and the DAO was the one that made the concept famous in a very terrible way because it got hacked, and then $150 million were basically lost in this incident. So then after that, no one wanted to even touch DAOs. And then we were like, this sounds like a cool concept. There was that issue, but never mind, we're going to do it right. And right now there are more than $4 million secured by Aragon. And a huge portion of that is actually secured by the new kind of organization that I'm going to present today. So any doubts about Aragon? I can show you guys how it works. So basically, I'm just going to go over a DAO. And so this is how a DAO looks like. You have multiple apps. This is like the management interface, if you will. And so I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you guys see it. And as I was saying before, it's open source. So if it's open source, means that you can have apps. It's like composable. You can have multiple pieces. It's modular. You can put a lot of things together to create your own sense of organization. So instead of trying to predict how people are going to organize in the future, which I think it's very difficult, because like, who would have predicted that people will organize around something like Bitcoin 20 years ago, right? In Bitcoin, if you think about it, it's mind-blowing, because it's, I think there was a tweet about this today, like, it's the most successful startup in the last 10 years, and yet it gave its cap table away. Like, it literally gave Bitcoin away to people that were mining or being participants. There was like no founder. I mean, there was like anonymous. So like, it's kind of hard to predict how the world will evolve. So instead of trying to be opinionated, we are saying, all right, we're taking the open source approach, which is we're just going to create the basic tools, and then people can organize however they want, and they can build upon them. And so, for example, there are some apps installed by default in this organization. So for example, there is like a token manager, and with the token manager, I think I disconnected from my network. And with the token manager, you can assign tokens to people. So in these tokens can mean a lot of things. So these tokens can mean voting power. These tokens can mean, for example, that they have access to a membership. So you may say, all right, I'm going to DAO this space here, and then if you don't have a token, you cannot go in, stuff like that, right? And you can have multiple ones. So for example, if I go here, like this is a token that belongs to this address, you can customize the names. So you can say, all right, this is like my family organization, and this is my dad. So you don't have to see like 0x44, whatever. You can just see like your dad's name. And then we have other apps, for example, voting, which enables people to vote. I mean, that's kind of very obvious. In this case, there are no votes, but you can create new votes here very easily. And also there is a finance app. And this finance app, you can think of it as like a wallet, basically. So I think there is another one here that has actually some funds. And by the way, like you can check all of this out. It's just there, so you can really go and check by yourself. Yeah, this DAO is a DAO that we actually use every day. So in Aragon One, which is the team that I work in, which is one of the teams working on Aragon, we use this DAO like almost every day. We have like our finances here. We have like DAI. We mostly operate with DAI as kind of a startup, and we pay salaries in DAI and everything. And we use the voting app, for example, to make votes so we can do withdrawals, for example. And so the cool thing about this structure is that these apps are not isolated. They are connected. And so they are connected using something called permissions. And so it works this way. For example, you can say, I have this finance app, and I don't want everyone to be able to withdraw money, obviously. Like, I just want this set of people to be able to withdraw money. Or I want the voting to be created, so my whole DAO has to agree, or 50% of my token holders have to agree in order to get funds out. And instead of trying to hard code that, we came up with a concept called permissions. And if you are familiar with kind of how operating systems work, it's a very similar concept. Like, you may not have permission to, run something as an admin of the system, but you can escalate. You can input a password, and then you escalate, and then you actually can perform that action. And it's very similar, actually. So if we check the permissions, for example, we will see that in this particular DAO, this finance app has a permission that is, for example, creating new payments, so taking money out. And the only entity that can do this is actually the voting app. And so in order to take money out, you have to create a voting. All right, and who can vote in this voting app? That's the next kind of logical step. And so if we go to voting, we can see, all right, create new votes. It's set to the tokens app. And so what that means is that as token holder, if you hold the A1 token, the Aragon One token, you are able to vote in the voting app. And if you are able to vote and the vote passes, then you are able to take money out of the DAO.